Nick Caserio not going anywhere after a day of rumors, according to John McClain. And yesterday, the rumors were interesting because in any other city, if you were talking about the general manager leaving 15 days before the draft, it would be weird and it would be relatively easy to dismiss. What? How would that happen? Why would this happen? Why? What's going on? Shut up. This is media crap, all that. But if you live in Houston, it wasn't weird for you. As a matter of fact, you should be conditioned to feel this way. And you don't even have to be in Houston that long to have this feeling. It is the Locker Room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610 and the Odyssey app. Allow me to explain. Let's just go through in the last 5 years, 6 years, get close to over half a decade, the general managers who have left here. And let's just talk about how weird those situations are. And then let's talk about how those situations compare to a potential departure of Nick Caserio. And let's talk about how Nick Caserio would be remembered, what his legacy would be if he were to leave this week, which John McClain says he's not going to. Let's just look at other sports, other major sports. So you had Jeff Luhnow leave after the Astros won a World Series and perhaps after they lost with the best team that he had ever assembled because of a cheating scandal. That's pretty damn shocking. Not many sports fans are going to be able to say. As a matter of fact, there's really three maybe that can say that they've experienced something like that in Major League Baseball, and the Astros experienced it more than anything. So the Luhnow thing was crazy. Maybe the best general manager in the history of this city gone after winning a World Series because of a cheating scandal and gone after the 2019 season. Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey was the brainiac, put together some really, really good Rockets teams. I don't want to call it abrupt, but Daryl Morey left and completely left the team in shambles. And I think he had a job like 10 minutes later in Philadelphia. That was pretty weird. James Click, just a few months ago, left after winning a World Series. Now, we could say he did it with Luhnow's guys, but you had a guy win a World Series and you had a GM the very next season. And oh, by the way, the guy who held down the fort for James Click was a guy who was filling in broadcasting games in Jeff Bagwell. And he was able to make some pretty big moves before they hired their general manager, signing Jose Abreu to a big money deal and then giving Rafael Montero $11 million a year. That's pretty weird. Now let's go to the Texans. Rick Smith. When Rick Smith left, I think it was probably about time. Now, if we'd have known what was going to happen after that, we probably would have hoped that Rick Smith would have never left. But when Rick Smith left, it was probably about time for a parting of ways. Him and B.O.B. were not getting along. He had some personal stuff going on. But as far as like a normal departure, this is the only thing that resembles a relatively normal departure that we've had here. And it really wasn't that normal. Rick Smith's departure. Can't say that with Luhnow. Damn sure can't say that with Luhnow. Don't think you can say that with Morey. James Click after a World Series, I guess it's happened before. But Rick Smith, as far as traditional normal departure, that's it. Brian GAINE was gone after an 11-5 season. As soon as Jack Easterby came into town, he planted some seeds, kind of added a little bit of passive-aggressive fuel to the fire when it came to Bill O'Brien and Brian GAINE, and he swooped in, took over, pushed himself up to power, gained the trust of the owners, and you fired your general manager after a draft, after an offseason, and after an 11-5 season, and you had a snake salesman and Bill O'Brien running the team. That's weird. Right after that, you were trading draft picks. You were making tough decisions. That is really weird, especially when you factor in who took over. When King Bill got fired in 2020, it was time. It might have been past time. He probably should have been fired a little bit sooner, because there was a big gray area that outside of winning the division titles, if you really look close at it, they had reached their peak. But Bill O'Brien getting fired 4 weeks into the season kind of surprised me. I thought Bill O'Brien basically had a lifetime contract. I thought he could do no wrong. So yeah, they started out 0-4, but when O'Brien left, when King Bill left, I thought he would have at least gotten to play out that season. So that was relatively surprising. And then Jack Easterby took over, and Jack Easterby left last year, which wasn't a shock, because we knew and we'd been saying that last year was going to be his final season. But just when Easterby left, it was a sigh of relief. I think it was the happiest departure of all these guys. I think there was some endearing qualities, maybe not with B.O.B., although B.O.B. wasn't, completely incompetent. But when Easterby left, there was a sigh of relief. You got rid of the biggest fraud that's ever been in the city, a guy who had no business being a front office guy. But there was also like a little bit of, man, how did this ever happen? We're happy that it's over, but we can't believe this happened. And just his whole thing was really, really surprising. So when you take all that into account, and you talk about Nick Caserio potentially leaving before the draft, it sounds weird. And I saw my buddy Tyler Milner tweet out, nobody's going to let their general manager leave 2 weeks before the draft. That doesn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. Maybe in another city it might not make sense, but in Houston, how weird would it be? How weird would a Nick Caserio departure right now, with a new head coach coming off arguably some of his worst few months of work between the Cooks and the Week 18 against the Indianapolis Colts? How weird would it really be in this city? I don't think it would be more weird than Luno. I don't think it would be more weird than Maury. The click thing, maybe, although we have seen, organizations part ways after success. So I'll put that as a maybe. The Rick Smith, probably not. Brian GAINE after 11-5 season, yes. And then you have just the O'Brien Easterby as a whole, probably not. So it really wouldn't be that weird if Nick Caserio left. And that's why, as those rumors were going on yesterday, it was easy to not dismiss them around here, because we know a lot about weird departures for general managers. But now I want to ask this question, and be sure to subscribe, and check out my other videos. Number one source for Texans daily digital content, and it's only starting to get more fun. We're 2 freaking weeks away from the NFL draft. Goodness gracious. I want to ask this. What would the reaction be if Caserio left? I tried to interact with as many fans as possible. I try to get the pulse of as many fans as possible. I think for the most part, the reaction with Rick Smith was, it's probably time, but we do appreciate, what he's done. Brian GAINE, we weren't really attached to him. Maybe people were upset with the lack of aggressiveness in free agency. O'Brien, I would say for the most part, people were happy. Easterby, anyone with an ounce of sanity was thrilled, yet frustrated that it happened. What would the reaction be if Nick Caserio left? I think Nick Caserio has done some really good, and he's done a little bit of bad, and there's a little bit of uncertain. The good, the Deshaun Watson trade, he handled as well as anyone could handle. He handled it like a boss. He had his hands tied, and he handled it like a boss. The potentially bad is the way in which he's drafted. Way too early to completely judge draft classes. He had limited draft equity a couple years ago, but at the very least, you got to give him a C right now and just let him go on to the next class. No one's going to give him an A or B for his draft classes so far. There's been some diamonds in the rough with Dameon Pierce, but other than that, there's a lot of to be determined, and there's a lot of meh. So you have that. So the great is Watson, and that might be the most important thing that he's done. The to be determined is the draft. The good is D'Amico Ryans. How much did he have to do with that? How much did the McNair step in? That's another thing. The bad, his association with the POS, Jack Easterby. Not good to be associated with one of the worst things to ever happen in the city. And the awful, and the period from not trading Brandon Cooks to not allowing Brandon Cooks to play against the Indianapolis Colts and not solidifying this number 1 overall pick right now and having your choice of the quarterback that you like most without any variables or any uncertainty. That is, after getting through the mud and going through whatever phase 1, I don't know if they're going to call it that or not, of the rebuild, that was as bad of a extended display as we will see. I will put it right below the stretch in which Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby traded DeAndre Hopkins and then had their awful free agency class with Randall Cobb, Eric Murray, the Whitney Merciless extension, all that. I will put Nick Caserio's handling of the Cooks up to 18 a notch below that, and that's the bad. And it could be really, really costly, but apparently he's going to have a chance to make right. So the reaction would be, I actually think there would be a portion of people that would be glad to be done with Nick Caserio. I think the connections to Easterby, the Patriot way, I think there would be some that would be happy. I don't know what portion would really be that sad. I think it would just be kind of meh, kind of blah. And there might actually be some excitement because I think DeMeco Ryans is the face of this franchise. I think DeMeco Ryans actually should have quite a heavy hand in making decisions. And I think people trust DeMeco Ryans as a face of the franchise. So as far as what would the reaction be, it wouldn't even be a 1 seed with all the departures that we just went through. Could just be a meh. But we'll see what happens with Nick Caserio. I'm rooting for him. I hope he gets the job done. I wish he hadn't mishandled the end of last season like he did. Process over results, not a very good process, but we'll see what happens. But according to John McClain, he is going to stay. What would your reaction be if Nick Caserio left? Give me your memories on all these departures. Which ones did you think were the most surprising? Which ones were the least? Which ones do you miss? Which ones are you the most happy that are gone? And subscribe, like, right along. We're 2 weeks away from this draft, man. This is a great time to be alive. Great time to be following this squad. And Nick Caserio ain't going nowhere. But even if he was, when it comes to this Texans game, we're all in this together. Have a good Friday, Junior.